whether we were making short films or like quote unquote animated things or, whatever, you can find a lot of maybe quote unquote deprecated skills like a puppet ministry or a flag banner ministry, things like that. They're like, oh man, I can't use this anymore, and actually reinvigorate them and put them in a modern context. So I don't know that there's technology that's hurt the church, but I do think a lack of dreaming and a lack of imagination is holding the church back from using all of its members' skills and passions really wonderfully. And actually, I had a congregation member who was one of the narrators for our audiobook and one of the narrators for some of our voiceover stuff, come up to me afterwards and said, I've gotten older and I thought that I couldn't give anymore to the church. Thank you for giving me a way to serve the church in a way that I never thought possible. And so it reinvigorated her ability to serve.
Hey, what's up, Kingdom One fam? Thanks for stopping by for another podcast. You just heard from KJ Rolk. He is our web developer here at Kingdom One. And the thing that I love about KJ is that he has this great knack for taking information architecture and organizing it in a way that is human and in a way that people are attracted to it. And if you're a ministry leader and you're thinking, does my website need an update? You're going to want to listen to today's conversation because we're going to be dropping some gems on how you can facilitate a great experience for your website. Let's get into today's podcast with KJ.
Welcome to the Kingdom One podcast, where we grow the church together. This podcast is here to give you big ideas and help you get practical with the tactical. Here's your host.
Well, hey, KJ, welcome to the Kingdom One podcast. So glad that you're here today. I'm so excited for this conversation. And just to kick things off, I want to hear a little bit about you. I want to kind of hear about your last role that you had in ministry and what you're passionate about in ministry.
Yeah, definitely. So my last role in ministry was a worship and creative director for a formerly United Methodist Church in Springfield, Missouri. And I mean, that was really great. That for the longest time, I thought that worship was going to be the thing to do with my life. I felt that calling, and then I got the job and I was like, oh, this is not my forever job. But the staff there was so good, and I just really got to explore and grow into who God made me to be. And so that's when I kind of discovered not just the worship stuff, but really all of the creative stuff, which led me down the road of web development, which really brings me to Kingdom One and to this podcast right now.
Awesome. It's so good to hear that just somebody be honest and authentic, that the role that you're in ministry right now might develop and change over time, and that it might, get better and you might find new things. Can you tell me what you were most passionate about, or is it web dev the thing that you're most passionate about at this moment when it comes to ministry?
It's kind of hard. So here's the deal. I read this really great article on CSS Tricks about front-end developers. And it's just called Front-End Developers Are Aware. And it talks about all of the things that front-end developers have to be aware of, because in the web development world, they touch almost everything. So they're not necessarily designers, but they have to be aware of good design because they're the ones implementing the design. They're not necessarily animators and videographers, but they have to be aware of animations and interactions and all those things. They're not necessarily on the server side, they don't have to deal with all that stuff, but they do kind of have to be aware of that because they have to deliver optimized results, right? And so I think front-end web development represents this really kind of unique intersectionality. And that's what I found that I loved working in the church, was not just doing the worship thing, but really figuring out how can I use my gifts and my skills as an IT hobbyist and film and creative hobbyist. And, I have, I'm very much a jack of all trades. And so finding out what my role was for the organization in a way that was intersectional really was the thing that made me come alive. And so I love having different kinds of projects and communicating effectively and thinking about, what was going to serve the church best, and not just the church broadly, but really our local congregation. And so I think that's what led me to web development. But that's, at the end of the day, whatever I'm doing, as long as I get to sit in that intersectional space of communicating effectively and helping ministries go further, faster, if you will, that's a thing that I really love to do.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so needed, because I think as we try to grow the church and as we're really intentional about being healthy, effective, and courageous, that somebody has to stand up and say, I have to be the center of the hub, and they have to really, manage a project well and, develop well. And so that you've done that recently with us with this new project called Spark Staffing. We kind of teased it last week. Sparkstaffing.co is our new staffing website. And for you listeners, the lens that we're looking through is relationship. It's looking through calling, and it's looking through cultural fit. But I think you have a unique perspective having built it, KJ. And I'd love to hear your philosophy, or what was going through your head when you were building Spark Staffing. Did you think we were totally crazy? Did you think it was possible? Like, just unfiltered, tell us what you thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had, been given a lot of examples of staffing sites that were kind of doing the work, and in one way or the other just kind of fell short. And honestly, the web changes so fast and so rapidly. And while we as consumers are able to keep up with those things, sometimes it's a lot. And then on the development side, if you don't have dedicated people who are constantly learning and constantly updating and all those things, then it's just like, it's one of those weird balances, I think, especially with church. If you're familiar at all with this small thing that we do called worship, then you're probably familiar with like that tension of, well, we're trying to do these new and inventive and creative things. And then other people are like, but why does it need to change? Right. And so just kind of figuring that out. But what I'm really excited about for Spark is I built it on the back of really just getting hired with Kingdom One. So I had just gone through the trenches of trying to find a job and trying to find a thing that fit me, and all of the frustrations of dealing with, like, I hadn't looked for a job in 6 years. And when I did, I was fresh out of college. So just the whole landscape had shifted, and I didn't know how to navigate it. And I was doing all the Googling that I could, but it was just hard, to be honest. And there are way more computers involved and way more, programs that are running things automatically. And I was just like, man, I know I've got soft skills because working in the church gives you soft skills, but it was just so hard for me to meet real humans. And so by the time that I got to that point, I was like, oh, finally I can talk human to human. And so really that's the heart of Spark Staffing, is to, yes, it is a staffing site. Yes, it does have some of those like automated things, but at the end of the day, we're really looking at emphasizing how humans can meet humans, and not just humans, but really great humans, and how we can get past I see that you went to so-and-so school and that you're proficient in Microsoft Office, but like really getting into, I see that you have a heart for ministry, and this is such a great ministry philosophy. Let me tell you about our ministry philosophy and how those things might align, and how to also say, you know what? Actually, I've read your ministry philosophy, and it's okay that we don't align on this, but I might be able to connect you with someone else, So really thinking about how we can foster human connection and spark something really wonderful in the hiring process.
That's funny that you mentioned that. I've had an experience moving from one ministry to the other, and that's just life. That's ministry. It happens. And so the ministry that I was at before was like, hey, you only do work here. I moved to this, it's a kind of progressive ministry. And the ministry actually asked like, hey, we need you to take 3 hours out of your month to give to other ministries and to like explore and to do something different. And it was just a paradigm shift of like, at my old job, they wouldn't let me, even talk to another ministry. Now they're actually encouraging me, go out and meet other ministries, see what they're doing, and see where you can help, because there is this idea of intersectionality, that we are one, we are one church. And so that was a breath of fresh air, and having a heads up of that, in the hiring process is so key. I'd love to talk about emerging technologies and some things that, maybe a pastor or ministry leader isn't watching right now. And I'm sure that you have your eye on some emergent technologies right now. Do you want to talk to us about some things that really excite you in the web space and in the tech space?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of separate from Spark, because I wasn't busy enough building that. I decided to revamp the Kingdom One website, and I'm kind of always thinking about those things. And I helped the church that I was working for before navigate updating their website, shift hosts, migrate from 3 church management systems, 3 separate databases into one, and like convert from emails to slide, right? So it's just like kind of all of these, like using these tools, trying to catch up with things. Unfortunately, all of that happened before we had to quarantine. So we were ready for asynchronous before we really had to deal with that. And we just had to deal with how everybody Zooms. But so I think about, what are those things that are, at the leading the bleeding edge of technology and web development. I'm sure that if you're even mildly familiar with the web space, you've probably heard questions about Web3 and what that's going to look like. And I think right now we're sitting on the cusp of that transition on Web to Web3, and churches generally are like finally getting into Web2. And so they're like, oh, now we have responsive websites and now we can do this, that, and the other thing, right? But what I'm really excited for is this idea of progressive web apps. And actually, you'll be able to check this out on our Kingdom One blog, but progressive web apps are the third option for that age old, well, I can't even say age old debate, but for that classic debate of, does our church really need an app? What about just having a great website? And progressive web apps really solve that question in a really unique and clever way.
Yeah, so let's chat through that. I would love to, because when we talk about Web 3.0, some people are like scratching their heads like, what do you mean? The web changed from the first version? There's a second version and a third version. I'd love to chat through like, what does Web 3.0 mean? Because I think some people might be scratching their heads. And then I would love to maybe do a little bit of a deeper dive on why this technology that you just identified can solve two problems with just one asset.
Yeah, definitely. So this is, KJ writes his own Wikipedia page about the web, because I'm definitely young enough that I really don't even know what Web 1 is, because I was being born when Web 1 was being born.
That's funny. That's hilarious that you say that, because I experienced Web 1 as like a 12-year-old, and it was like Angel Fire and like these little GIFs, like the stickers that you use now on Instagram was the entire internet back when it first started. So that's just to give some context.
Yep. Yeah. So just throw your mind back to the 90s. And that's Web 1, right? And then .com crashes and all those things. And then you move to the current millennia. And especially, I think, after 2005, well, really after iPhones hit the scene and we started getting mobile technology, that's Web 2. And thinking about, how we make things ready and available for our iPhones and all those things. Web 3 says, okay, so we've been through two versions. Why are we still doing things the way that we're doing them? And I think really, to sum it up and be real tongue in cheek about it, it's millennials finally got hold of web development. And so now they're just like, well, let's just question everything. And it's leading to some really interesting things, not just in the design space, but also in the accessibility space, and thinking not just about like, how do we think about like user interactions and information and the experience of that, but really, how can we make this great and make the web an accessible place for people of all abilities to come and use the internet to its fullest potential. So I think that Web3 really calls into question. Web3 is going to be about chaos and then something new coming out of that. But Web2, I think where churches are is going to be really great. And that's where this idea of progressive web apps come. So Nick, are you familiar with like the arguments for and against the website and an app?
Yeah, I really pushed churches to get apps back in the day. I was like, hey, it can help with giving. It can be a consolidated source where everything can take place. And so, yeah, that was the big argument that I tried to push to churches back in the day. It was, it's a centralized place for you to meet.
Did you hear any of the pushback about like, well, why isn't our website just that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we can access it on our phone. So why not just do that? And for some churches, that is the answer. I think it's context is key, but I always like new things. And so I was the shiny new toy thing. And so when it came to the newest thing on web, I was about it.
Yeah, for sure. So my church, we bought into the church app thing in 2017, went with Subsplash and did the whole thing. But you know what? Honestly, while it was cool and it felt shiny and wonderful, we weren't using the giving because we were still running 3 CHMSs at the time, which was, so like we were running the local server version of Shelby to manage like payroll and giving and all those things, right? So like couldn't access it from the web, none of that. Like you couldn't integrate it with any of the modern giving platforms. So we couldn't even have really online giving. So that was super frustrating. But then we realized that we were starting to use Planning Center more. Church Community Builder was kind of the thing that was rolled out in 2012, but it just wasn't like integrating properly like the way that we needed to do it. We had just updated the website and all those things and really kind of thinking through that. And honestly, having a church app just made it to have another place that we had to put content, right? And so for our communications people and for our graphic designers thinking about building assets for communications, like when we're talking platforms, we were running a print newsletter, an email newsletter, a digital sign, social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, like all of the on-campus wayfinding and sermon slides. And then also we had separate kids newsletters. We had a separate youth newsletter, both of them using different newsletter sources. We also had a preschool, right? So just like, it was like so many platforms and none of them talked to each other. And so it was like thing after thing after thing that our communications team had to update. And when I say communications team, I mean one person and some other kind soul who took it upon themselves to help occasionally, right? So what we found was the church app just became a lot. And by the time that we had updated our website to be really mobile friendly and responsive and look great on all the things, it was just like, I don't know that we need to have this app because we still can't give through it. And it's just another place to put things. And we saw people didn't really download it. People who downloaded it opened it fairly regularly, but they didn't really download it. And then we just kind of sunsetted it. And we were like, you know what? This is not good. The only time that I think it was really uniquely helpful was when we released an album concurrently with a sermon series. And so we would put out we went through the Psalms. And so we put out 10 Psalms for the 10 weeks of the sermon series. And they were like the rough masters. And then we eventually released them on streaming. So they're like some kind of unique media opportunities. Or we did, one of our pastors wrote a book. And so we did an audiobook companion that we hosted in the app, but now we've put it on Audible. So, like it's one of those things where like there are definitely workarounds. It was cool while we had it, but it just ended up being good for the time. And then we just sunsetted it. So progressive web apps are, I think, that unique space. Sorry, I realize I've been talking a lot, but I don't know. This is really exciting to me.
This is fascinating. Those two things that you said right there are probably game changing for somebody who has an app and somebody who feels like the tension of what do we do with the app right now? Well, there's these unique like media opportunities that if you think about it, and one of the things that we used to talk about a lot at the church I served at was there's 168 hours a week. We're in church for 1 hour a week. What is something we can do with the extra 167 is what we would call it. And so just hearing what you said, like I would love to have heard an audiobook from my pastor or a podcast or something very interesting in order to accompany what's happening on the weekend that we could facilitate a conversation around week to week. So I think that's fantastic. I'm really excited to hear about this new web app technology that you're talking about. And you have an example of a church who's already doing it too, right?
I do have an example of a church who's already doing it, but I also have some examples of other companies that are using them just to see like really how flexible and wonderful this is. And they're companies that you heard of, even if the church you may not have heard of. So this is the tension point, right? Is realistically, if you're going to build a custom app, if you're going to go like the Life Church route and build your own Bible app or something, that's going to cost 5 to 6 figures. And I don't know how much money you have in your bank and how much debt you have to, whatever. Maybe you've got just like super deep pockets, in which case go for it. But realistically, you're going to go with something like a Subsplash, which is going to be like a templatized thing. And you can customize it some, but essentially it's the same app, right? Which is handy because then it feels familiar and you don't have to worry about all the code, but then you're actually kind of locked into what you can do, right? You don't have the opportunity to do something really creative and cool. You can't you can't create like a single app screen that like is wholly dedicated to Good Friday or, an Ash Wednesday service, something like that, and has like crazy cool animations. Like you can't do like a Spotify Wrapped in your app because it's not really your app, right? But you could do that with your church website and you could make it responsive and make it feel like an app experience, right? And so progressive web apps are this marriage of church websites and church apps, things that you fully control, things that you would like to control that are, mobile friendly, responsive, quick, all those things. So progressive web apps, the thing is they're basically mobile friendly websites, but they add some extra lines of code that allow you access to things like push notifications and offline caching. So like if you're on an iPhone, you can just hit that share button and hit add to home screen, and it will store on your home screen and launch. It'll have like that launch a splash page, and all those things. And so it'll feel like an app, but it really is just like a regular web page that gets stored on your phone. And the reason that's powerful is because if you're in a place that has really spotty Wi-Fi or really spotty cell coverage or something, and so like you'd be like, oh man, I'd love to, have a website, but people just, they literally have trouble connecting to the internet because I don't know, maybe they're in the mountains or maybe they're in a rural area, whatever. Progressive web apps store some data, and then when they're in network, they will update themselves in the background kind of automatically. So that it's really like handy, and it can feel like an app, right? And it can feel like, but you have all that stuff cached, which is incredible. Also, they are tiny, which means you're not going to be spending like, even if you have like a really small data plan, you're not going to have to worry about, oh man, all this background data, is just eating up this thing, and I need to check my stocks. So and to give you an example of this, I wanted to bring up Starbucks, which is probably the most famous progressive web app. So they obviously have a mobile application, but they built a progressive web app with the point of reaching quote unquote emergent markets or people like these rural communities, right? So their iPhone app is 148 megabytes, which is pretty standard. Facebook, I think, is probably about double that. But 140 megabytes is pretty standard for a web app install, for an iPhone app install. Their progressive web app, which is AKA their website, is 233 kilobytes.
That's tiny.
It is 99.84% smaller than their mobile app. And it's faster.
And it performs like an app.
Yeah, it's wild. It is like, so people love using it because it has all the same interactions and same features because it's using modern programming languages, but it's tiny. And so I think that that's so cool. And obviously you can get geolocation from your thing and get the push notifications. And so, like it feels really like an in-app experience, but nothing really is installed. Or if it is kilobytes of data. And so that's like, just incredible.
That's fantastic. It almost feels like that trend like that was happening with cars, like the fast cars were the muscle cars. Like they were the heavy, like you had heavy engines, like took a lot of gas. And then people were like, hey, we can actually, through intake and through like the wizardry that, car people do, that they got smaller and they got tinier, but they got faster. And so it feels like this is an interesting paradigm shift, for churches to embrace, because like if you are in an emergent market, like you said, if you're in a small place, like, can we talk about the church that you found? Because I feel like that church is a great first example of being a trendsetter, but at the same time, like there's something about this church that I think we can agree upon.
Yeah, definitely. So progressive web apps, Web3, like all this kilobytes of data, megabytes of data, whatever. I know that it can sound really intimidating. You're like, oh man, that's a lot. It feels like a whole new territory. But this church, if you want to check it out, it's stgeorgetrumbull.org. Just look up St. George Orthodox Church. It's a website that looks like it was built in Web 1 and just wasn't updated except for maybe a slider on the homepage. Like it is incredibly bare bones, incredibly simple, and it is a progressive web app. So you can install it to your home screen and it has a splash. It has like all those things. And so I think like it's kind of simple if you've got, the right kind of website, which right now I'm looking at WordPress websites. I don't know that you can do it with Squarespace or Wix, but if you've got the right website and you've got maybe some people who are interested in it, you can definitely learn this technology and wrap your website with these couple of bits of code and make it a progressive web app. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It doesn't even have to change really your website. And it also doesn't really have to look beautiful. If St. George can do it, so can you.
That's so true. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just embrace the technology and be authentic about who you are. I really feel that their website is a reflection of who they are, but they're still using an emergent technology. It didn't change them in any way, shape, or form, which I think is, this technology is going to change your ministry. You know what I mean? It's not going to be flavor it in a way that's unrecognizable. So two things as we kind of roll this to an end, technology that the church needs to embrace. I would love to hear from you about that. But secondly, like I love your voice when it comes to technology and the things that you're writing on our blog. Can you, as we chat through this, can you talk to us about some of the pain points that you're solving through some of your blog posts?
Yeah, definitely. So with the blog posts, I think it's it's really easy to find someone who, at least for me, like you're really excited about learning. Maybe you hop on to one of those free learning how to code websites or something like that, or you pick up a cheap course on a learnable Udemy, type learning platform. And you're like, okay, I feel like I can write the code and I want to practice and I love my church. And so I'd love to be able to do this thing. And then you jump in and you're like, okay, so I'm a little bit confused, but I know how to read the form, whatever. And so I think for me, really, it's just about like, what are we thinking about and how can we not just like think about what the trendy thing is, but really localize it for our church. And then also, one of my big passions is I really love explaining some of these things. And so writing kind of documentation for the non-fluent developers, because documentation can be kind of hard sometimes. And so, yeah, I think that just thinking about those things and thinking about the conversations that we've had, I think of it, maybe it's because of my worship background. I think of it as like, there's the traditional worship people and the contemporary / modern worship people who everybody's like, what does that even mean these days? And then if you have, taken some coursework or things, maybe you're hearing about ancient future worship styles. And so kind of that blend of like, what's something that is really rooted in our history, but also looks forward and meets us where we are at this current time. And I think what we're experiencing on the website is that same kind of question of like, I don't know, why does it need to change? Why do we need to move away from CDs and, into progressive web apps? And also like, but still trying to figure out, obviously the internet is too young to call it ancient, but I think taking that same ancient future approach, that same intersectionality and thinking through really what's going to be the best solution for you specifically in your church. Yep. And so examining the pros and cons of things and without really passing judgment, just saying like, here are why this situation might apply for you and use this to make the best decision possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love. I love your voice. It's really real. It's authentic. It's where sometimes you get a little quippy, and I love that because I think, I think a lot of times there's not a lot of fun in some of the web dev guys out there. And there's just so much fun working with you and the projects that we've worked on. I've had such a great time. Guys, if you want to check out any of the work, you can go to kingdomone.co/services to find out all of our services. You can click on that web spot and see some of the work that we've been doing there. And yeah, as we wrap this, KJ, is there any like emergent technology beyond what you've shared that you're really into? Like, do you think that the VR space is going to be where church is in the next couple of years?
I don't think the church can exist in VR space unless they're a church like Life Church, where they have like, again, the deep pockets, the dedicated development team to really think and build through those things. But I will say, what progressive web apps offer us, and even what like some kind of clever thinking behind websites offer us, is building, like a Spotify Wrapped, or building something that is really wonderful and interactive. Maybe you're familiar with like Pottermore as a website, those kinds of things, but thinking through that and maybe some AR technology, which might be a little more accessible to, program maybe maybe not this year's, but maybe next year's Good Friday service. If you think about a Stations of the Cross and you think about not just in person, but also online congregations, if you can develop a really creative landing page, you can take people not just through the Stations of the Cross, but you can have physical stations on your church's campus. You can pre-record videos, or you can set up an AR experience. And either way, like however you want to get people involved, thinking about a website and a landing page that enhances a person's in-person experience, and also with that accessibility intersection in mind, if they come to it fully on their own and it's just online, then they still get a really rich way to dig deeper into their faith and to examine one of the best parts of Christian tradition.
I love being able to have conversations around web technology and ministries. It is so important to me and to Kingdom One that we build effective, courageous, and healthy ministries. And you might be a pastor or a ministry leader asking yourself, does my website effectively communicate what we do at my ministry? And if you want to answer that question, you can go to kingdomone.co/get started today so that we can help you make sure that your website is converting people to your cause. That's so important. Go to kingdomone.co/get started today. Second, we talked about Spark Staffing, and Spark Staffing is such a great way for your ministry to hire your next candidate. The way that we do this is we think about it through the lens of three important factors. One is relationship. Ministry is about relationship, so we want to make sure that whoever we're presenting in our staffing, that they are somebody who can maintain and cultivate relationships at a high level. The second thing is calling. Is this person called to ministry? Specifically, is this person called to your ministry? Because calling is so important. You want people to show up week in and week out because they have a calling on our life, not because they want to pick up a paycheck. And thirdly, we think about cultural fit. This person may be a rock star, but will they fit the culture of your ministry? If you can think through these through lenses, then one thing that is for you is Spark Staffing. SparkStaffing.co. You can get 15% off your next job posting by using the coupon code SPARK at checkout. Go to SparkStaffing.co. Use Spark coupon code at checkout for 15% off your next job posting. Guys, thanks for hanging out for another podcast. Until we chat again, let's grow the church together.